When someone you love is suffering, how do you show up with more presence? In today's episode of The Legacy of Love, I'm joined by Reverend Christine Davies, a hospital chaplain, seminary professor, and spiritual director with over 20 years' experience supporting patients and families through grief, caregiving, and the tender moments surrounding end of life. We talk about how to hold space when there's nothing to fix, how to care for yourself as deeply as you care for others, and how our spiritual practices can become daily acts of grounding. This conversation is both practical and really profoundly human. And honestly, I know I needed it as a mother, as a caregiver, and as someone who wants to show up with an open heart, even when life feels heavy. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did. Christine Davies, welcome to the Legacy of Love podcast. I'm so happy you're here with us.
Yes, I'm thrilled to be here and so excited that you're doing this and putting this important content out into the world.
Yeah, well, likewise. It seems like we're speaking the same language, which I love. And before we kind of dive into all that we want to talk about today, I'd love for listeners to know why you do this work. What brought you to serve in this area as a chaplain, having conversations around end of life care? What originally brought you here?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not something that came up at career day, in elementary school. And even my children are very confused about what it is that I do. They like to tell people that I'm a nurse in the hospital or a pastor, but not in a church. And I really got into this due to both my love for spirituality and religion and my love of medicine. So I thought at one point in time that I would go into medicine and become a physician. I then took organic chemistry and realized that is not for me. And I also had some health crises myself and realized, oh, there's different ways of healing. And I was really drawn to the spiritual way of healing, but then also how it really integrates with medicine in particular. I worked as an EMT on the backs of ambulances for a time, and it was really there where I was doing minimal, medical maintenance and ensuring safe transport, but it was holding people's hands while they were scared and bearing witness to the
Mm.
suffering that really changed my perspective of the ways in which I can be with people when they're going through something really intense. And so I am a Presbyterian minister and went to seminary not really knowing what I was going to do. I didn't think I wanted to be, a pulpit pastor, congregational leader up there every week preaching, and also had a MSW. So I thought maybe I'd be more of a therapist for clergy, and I do certainly some of that in my work. But I had to do a required internship as a chaplain in a hospital and just really fell in love with it. And that's
Mm.
what led me to kind of make it my life's calling.
Oh, I love that. And we have similar stories. Biochemistry is why I didn't go the more traditional medical route. But I also thought I was going to be a hospice nurse before
Mm.
I started doing the work that I do as a private fiduciary, but similar chemistry. Yeah, no fun.
Yeah, we're not the people you want to talk to at cocktail parties. This is not, the
Yeah. A light, uplifting. Yeah.
hmm hmm
So for those that don't kind of swim in the waters that we swim in of end of life care and going in and out of hospitals and such, can you define for listeners what you do as a chaplain?
Yeah, a lot of times people don't know what a chaplain is. Maybe if they've served in the military, they may have some familiarity or have seen Father Mulcahy on MASH and know it from that perspective. But often I'll walk into a patient's room, they're like, wait, what are you here? What are you doing? And sometimes they'll confess to me, I'm not very religious. I say, that's okay. I'm not the church police. But a chaplain is really, so I'm part of the hospital team and I'm an extra layer of emotional and spiritual support for whatever the patients may be going through, and we're also there for the families as well as the hospital staff. So, as you can imagine, hospitalizations can bring up all sorts of other emotions attached to them. Certainly around end of life, and that's probably 75 to 80% of what we do. But someone could be there for a routine appendectomy, but the last time they were in the hospital, they were saying goodbye to their parent. And so, of course, they're going to be
Mm,
flooded with, memories of that and grief. And it really brings people's mortality into sharp focus. I'm also having conversations a lot of times with people about their coping. With some, it's about questions that they may be having of a spiritual or existential nature of, why is this happening to me right now? And really
mhm.
kind of parsing that out with them in the moment. So that's kind of where I come in. I was behind a surgeon not so long ago that didn't realize I was behind him, and he was talking to a resident, and he was passing the meditation room. And he says, "Oh, yeah, you want to call the chaplains because they're the closest thing to therapists we have in the hospital, so they can really help patients." So I thought that was a bit of a compliment that that is a lot of what we do. And certainly we bring in religious ritual as well if that's helpful to a person. But I like to let people know that someone does not have to be religious to utilize us. I think we are all spiritual in lots of different ways. And that's what we're really looking to support in those moments.
Oh, I love that. And I love that example. The closest thing that we have to a therapist. It resonates because I think when I'm serving, and so for me and my work, I work also alongside clients as they're transitioning, as they get, diagnoses. They're not always referred to hospice, but, it's kind of a, real long decline of life. And in the Bay Area, I think specifically where I serve, a lot of people consider themselves not religious. They may have a spiritual life, they may not at all. So it's wonderful to know that you can still be of service and support kind of despite that. And I think that that's a big piece of educating people. What I've seen for the clients that I've served that identify as not religious and not spiritual, I see them as really kind of turning away, services such as yours, where they just they're not even open to that conversation. So even just having that example helps me also inform, the people that I serve. We could just see this as like a free therapy session.
Well, and yeah, I mean, sometimes that's how people really come to us. And I think it's helpful to delineate, what is the difference between religion and spirituality? Because I think they often get lumped together. And so I like to define religion as an agreed upon set of rituals, practices, and beliefs held by a community for the sake of communing with the divine, right? So that's what we think about usually when we think about traditional faith or religion. Spirituality is more broad, and it's how you connect to and explore the world within and around you, and how you make meaning and find transcendence. And for
Mm,
some people, religion is going to check the box of spirituality. It might be like, yep, when I go to synagogue, I get all of that available to me. For others, they may say, well, some of it I get from church, some of it I get from my own individual sense of spirituality. And some people say religion isn't part of it. It's, I come to spirituality from, being in nature, listening to music, being with my family. And so, really, it's about what matters most to you. What are your values and how are you living them out, especially when you're looking at end of life or end of life planning? How can we help you to be able to articulate those and communicate those to your family?
I love that. And I think that's, exactly, why and what's inspired this podcast is to have these conversations and not wait until, we're on our deathbed. That
Mhm.
ultimately, like when we're focusing in on this area, it's an opportunity to not just only talk about our death and our final wishes once we pass, but really it's an opportunity for us to get clearer on what matters to us most in our life so that we can live out that legacy. What I find is, the people that have put thought and intention into their estate plan, not always, but often it's kind of the same people that are living their life really in alignment for themselves and not asleep at the wheel. And so I think that that's so much where having these kind of conversations is really the opportunity And what I'm hoping listeners kind of take away is that yes, getting an estate plan, yes, having thought and consideration around our end of life care planning is so important for so many, reasons, legal, financial, etc. But really it's an opportunity for us to be clearer on what matters most to us as we live, right?
Yeah. And, this is the reason that we're not fun at dinner parties is because we don't, as a society, tend to like to talk about death. That's
Yeah.
seen as this taboo topic. In my work, I encounter it multiple times a day. And so it is always at the forefront of my mind. And I do believe that if we can meditate on really the brevity of our time here and recognize how short our life is, that makes it all the more precious, right? If I
Mm.
can say, what is it that I want people to be talking about at my funeral? I know it sounds morbid, but then I'm going to try to live into that now, what I want my legacy to be, and enjoy life really to the fullest, and
Yes.
not put things off. My husband and I would joke, we're like, we're not saving all our travel for retirement because
Yeah.
no day is promised. We're taking the big trips now while we can enjoy them and really trying to make the most of this life we have. I like to joke that the trend of YOLO, you only
Yeah.
live once, like do the adventurous thing now. I mean, in a way, they were onto something in terms of really trying to be present in the moment, so that we can, say the things that we want to say to our loved ones now. Tell them that we love them because, we want them to know that, and we won't be around forever, and we don't know the day or the time. So why not front load it?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think ultimately it's like we didn't come here to just accumulate a pile of stuff and pass that down to the next generation. I mean, really, what we leave behind, our true legacy is
Mhm.
people are going to remember how we made them feel. How do we show up in life? Are we
Mhm.
showing up in life like grumpy and complaining about life and just, kind of asleep at the wheel, showing up to a 9 to 5 job? Or are we like living out loud and in alignment and having, important conversations and being present for our loved ones and doing the adventure? And especially of just being a new mom, it's brought this
Mm.
work, like it's kind of expanded out like this work for me and my heart and passion for serving, because I know it that much more deeper, with as a mother. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole other legacy that you're leaving. Yeah, and really about how are we finding meaning and purpose, and running toward that.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I mean, for me, that was very much kind of my path, and what originally brought me to this work was being witness to a loved one's final 3 days of life. And,
Mm.
at the time I was in a dead end job, a dead end relationship, and really kind of stuck in fear and not moving through life. And then, witnessing that and also witnessing within myself, there was this clear leaning in to her dying, to
Mm.
support her, to be witness to that. And you can see the contrast. Like most people aren't leaning into that. A lot of people don't show up. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. And there was just like this almost inner knowing for me of just leaning into that. And anyways, I kind of followed my path to eventually doing this work.
Yeah, and grief can bring that out sometimes. It of course it's a terribly hard experience of suffering, and it can also be clarifying in terms of what are our priorities, and how do we make the most of the time that we do have.
Right. So I'm curious, just as another professional that's serving in this way, what kind of practices, whether they're daily or just kind of rituals in your life, help support you and not having burnout, able to just continue to expand and serve, because this work is heavy, right? It
Yes.
is and can feel so much to carry. So I would love to just hear from you on what some practices that you have in your life.
hmm Yeah, so I have become better at self-care because I did it so terribly for so long. And in fact, the first time I was asked to speak on it, my husband's like, "Really? That they want you to speak on this?" But I think the first thing is recognizing the necessity of it. I think for so long I was in denial that, these things were impacting me and thinking I could just rise above it or I was some sort of martyr. And now I teach this, to my students as well. Like this work will get at you. It's whether or not you
Wow.
acknowledge it, and in some ways, it's going to come out in ways that you don't want it to either. So, one of the things that I do is certainly have people around me to hold me accountable for when I'm not
Mm.
seeing that I need that care, right? So, people that can say, Christine, you're a little irritable today, or I could tell how tired you are. You're not operating on all cylinders here. Who can kind of speak with sometimes the term that we use in kind of Christian circles is speak that truth to love to really help me to see what I'm not seeing. And so some of that are, great friends that I have. Some of it are peer supervision circles. So other chaplains that are doing this work that I'm meeting with. I also work as a spiritual director. So I meet with other spiritual directors to talk about our work and really debrief and decompress as well. I'm a big component of therapy. I used to be a therapist. I have a therapist and also have my own spiritual director, my own personal trainer. I have a whole cadre of people on my payroll that help me get through this and really try to normalize that for people. That life
Yeah.
is hard. And even when things are going well and there's no major crises, you want to do some of these activities proactively so that you have
Mm.
them in place. Certainly, I talked about, loving to go on vacation, but you also don't want to save up all of that self-care. Often when I ask nurses in the hospital, I'm like, "Oh, what are you doing for self-care?" They'll talk about going on vacation. Sometimes they'll talk about having an extra large glass of wine that night, which is a whole other matter. But we want to have some of those daily practices as well. So it can be so simple as drinking water, making sure that I'm moving my body, just checking in with myself. What am I needing? I think those of us in any sort of helping or caregiving profession are really good at not paying attention to ourselves and putting others first. So it's
Yeah.
really about changing that mindset to know I am going to not be of use to anyone if I've poured out everything all day long and, come home and, I'm yelling at my kids because they're not picking up their clothes when it's really I'm exhausted and irritable or haven't taken any time for myself on that particular day. So, those are a few things I do. Certainly, silence helps me quite a bit. And I do have a long commute from the hospital, but I value that time as kind of my transition time to get home. And I live on this, we call it a hobby farm, although it's in shambles most of the time. But just being out in nature and chasing chickens and weeding in the garden and doing these other things that are completely unlike the work that I do really does ground me as well.
Right. I love that. Yeah, I just planted an herb garden with my daughter, and there is something
Mm,
like just being in nature and getting your hands dirty. I don't know. I always just find like such symbolism doesn't feel like the right word, but let's just roll with that word, symbolism in nature of just like the truth of life. It's like, oh yeah, there's like a time for pruning and now like,
hmm
some dead leaves are falling off and, we've got to weed and all of these little things. Even with her at a year and a half, we're kind of looking at and teaching and anyways, it has made me reflect on just, the kind of the truth of life. And I think,
hmm
so much in especially in the US where business and patriarchy and this capitalist like always go, go, go and grow, grow,
hmm
grow. That's really not true. There's nothing in the natural world that's just always kind of in this full bloom. We have to have
hmm
this rest and this recovery and this time for going in. So I thank you for sharing those
Yeah,
practices.
that's a beautiful metaphor of the cycle, and I think the deep spirituality that is often found in nature as well, and all that it can
Right.
represent.
I know. I find that, and that for me has also been the gift of motherhood
Mm.
because my daughter was born when I was at kind of the tail end of my second year in business and starting my third year in business. And I guess I didn't have enough time to really do so much damage because I am still pretty young. But, once becoming a mother and then juggling a small business, it's like
Mm-hmm.
really, wow, yeah, my oxygen mask was not on, and nothing can prepare
Mm-hmm.
you for becoming a parent. Nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm such a planner.
Mm.
So I took all the classes, we were all ready in that sense, but I think ultimately you kind of don't know. And that's really the truth of life.
Yep. I like to say that, my kids will be in therapy for different reasons than I'm in therapy. Like I will make plenty of mistakes, but they'll be slightly different than the mistakes that my parents made for me. But it's, we're all just doing our best. And yeah, it's, you and I could have a whole conversation about the struggle of juggling it all and trying to balance it, especially given the intensity of the work that we do.
Yeah. I mean, that for me, that's where the first thing that went out the window once my daughter was born was meditation. But it was also the
Mhm.
first thing that I realized, like, oh, I really need this, even if it's just, a 5 or 10 minute practice that day, if that's all I can fit in, because it's
Mhm.
that, again, connecting to the truth that we all are. And for me, that's been like just, an absolute necessity.
Well, I have a tip for you then, because I use this a lot I have a lot of spiritual direction clients who are also, busy women.
Yes.
So you may have heard of habit stacking. If you want to do a habit, you stack it on something else. So I like
Yes.
to
I've read that
talk
book,
about,
Atomic Habits.
there you go,
Yeah. Yeah.
by James Clear. So I don't know that he would approve of this, but I like to talk about spiritual habit stacking, because a lot of times I have people that tell me like, oh, I need to read my Bible for 20 minutes or meditate for an hour or go on a retreat. I'm like, those are all lovely things, but they're usually not available to us
Yeah.
on a daily
On a
basis.
daily basis.
And
Yes.
so I recommend think of something that you are already doing, and there are ways to kind of infuse mindfulness in that. So,
Mm.
for example, if I'm drinking my coffee while chasing my kids out to get onto the bus and it spills everywhere, and by the time I get back to it, it's cold, that's one experience. If I am able to take my coffee and just for 2 minutes go outside and listen to the bird song and think about my day and, reflect on the beans that we ground that morning and what they taste like, it's a very different experience, but it's the same
Mm.
act. So, what are the things that you are already doing that you can just infuse a little bit of the sacred into, or a little bit of the mindfulness, or whatever it is that you're needing? So, it could be, I had one person said, okay, every time I go to the bathroom, I'm going to think of something I'm grateful for. I'm like, fantastic. Like
Oh,
you're
that
going to go to the
works.
bathroom anyway. So, you can think of something that you're grateful. And if you're a mom of young kids, you're probably not going to go to the bathroom by yourself.
Yeah.
But if you can think of things that you're going to do every time I'm going to put laundry in, I'm going to, sing my favorite song. That maybe it's a hymn, maybe it's not. But thinking about what are the little things that you're already doing, and you can just have a moment of mindfulness within those. That's what I would encourage you or your listeners to
Oh,
try on.
I like that. Thank you. I definitely now I'm like my brain's already thinking of ways I
You'll
can.
have to let me know what you wind up trying out.
Yes, I absolutely will. Yeah, I've done a few of like bringing in like listening to podcasts that are like more spiritual and supportive, and also going for a walk where it's like a bit of movement in that. But that feels
Mhm.
a little different, like just more into I'm thinking like sitting down more mindfully as we're eating or having your morning cup of coffee, or I don't know about the bathroom one.
I had never heard of that one before. I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
That's funny. Anyways, I'm taking more out of this conversation than I was anticipating. So I really appreciate your wisdom sharing with me, Christine. So with end of life care planning, I'm curious, what does that look like, at least in your world? Are you sitting down proactively with clients or with patients? Is this more of, a major surgery is being scheduled and you're beginning to have these conversations knowing that? Can you kind of share a bit of how you work with clients in this planning phase of end of life
Mhm.
care?
All of the above. So in
Okay.
my hospital, chaplains are the ones responsible for the execution of advanced directives. And in other hospitals, it may be different disciplines. So other hospitals I've worked, it's been social work. Other places, it's been patient representatives. My hospital, it belongs to the chaplains. And I do think there's an appropriateness to that because occasionally when I am meeting with individuals and talking about what they would like, a lot of times their grief does come up and they say, "Oh, when we went through this with my brother, it was so hard." And so it's the stories around what their decisions are going to be that often indicate what they are going to want. We see patients in a number of ways. So every patient is asked upon admission by the nurse that's admitting them to inpatient hospital, do they have an advance directive? And if not, would they like one and to fill one out while they're at the hospital? And so if the latter, we get consulted and go. And sometimes we get there, the patient's like, "Oh no, I don't want to, I don't want to talk about that," which is fine. We say, "All right, if you change your mind, let us know." Sometimes we do have patients that we know are moving more toward palliative care, and that
Mm.
team will refer to us then in those moments. And every surgical patient is given an advance directive to fill out, and sometimes they wait till they get to the hospital to do it. So they're occasionally we're doing it right before someone goes into surgery, which is not the ideal time. But so all of those are different scenarios that may come up. And we do it in two parts. We do the healthcare proxy,
Mhm.
and then we also do, if people want, the instructed for living will, which is a little bit harder. Certainly, we don't do that right before someone's, going into surgery because it's a little bit more detailed. But my biggest really ask of people is to do these things before you get to the hospital. To
Mm.
have these conversations and think through. Who would I want to make decisions for me medically in case I can't make decisions myself? By the time you're in the hospital, sometimes it's a little too late to really make those. And depending on where you are in what state or what country, there is going to be a legal way that that happens. But I think it's much better to have in writing, and not just to name that person, but to have a conversation with that person about what you would want done if you can't speak for yourself. Because I do see what happens when that is not in place. And that's what I want your listeners to be able to avoid. So many conversations in the ICU when the person, is not conscious. And I see families really ripped apart saying, "I don't know what you would want done. I wish I knew. I wish we had talked about this." And it's a time when your family is already grieving. If it's unclear about what your wishes are, there's additional guilt that is placed on the family. And so while you are healthy and not in severe emotional distress, I encourage you to have these thoughts and to think about it and to contact you or anyone that's within their state to really help fill out these documents, but not just the documents, also have the conversation about it.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'd be curious on your way in here, but my kind of takeaway why people aren't having these conversations is really we don't want to look at the reality that there's one guarantee in life, and that's that we're all
Hmm.
going to die. So let's avoid it. And that denial piece, it's like, oh, we're not going to have the conversation. And ultimately your death could look so different, and also for your
Hmm.
loved ones and whomever you're naming, you really set them up to feel confident if that time ever comes of really administering things the way that you would want, because in those situations it can be so heavy, and oftentimes it is a crisis when someone's needing to make those decisions. At least that's what I've found.
Hmm. Yeah, I like to phrase it as a future gift for your family. If you can do
Yeah.
this, it will benefit them later on. Hopefully, no one ever has to use it, but it'll be there and it'll give you a peace of mind. And if that doesn't convince you, what convinces me to do it is I'm a control freak. I like things a certain way. So
Yeah.
I'm going to want to be able to control that, even when I know that I can't. Again, it is this opportunity, if you can see it from a larger perspective, it's this opportunity to communicate what your values are. And I'm sure you use certain documents. There's documents out there where it's not just what do I want done or not done, but there's other things that people can also, we encourage people, write a letter alongside it to say,
Mhm.
this is what I want my family to know. Or there's some pieces too where you can talk a little bit more about, if I am at end of life, I would want, this type of music playing, or I'd want these people present, or if you're religious, would you want sacrament of the sick or a certain prayer being said? So to the extent that you want to, you can think even more in depth about those things. But my big ask is at least think about who's going to make the decisions and let them know what you would want done medically.
Mm. And also making sure that they're willing to act in that role,
That
right?
would be ideal, right? At least in my state, we have, I tell people you can have your first choice, you can have your second choice, you can have your third choice. Because if the first two say no, or I had it once where
Yes.
the first choice was, on a cruise and not reachable, and it was like a 30 or 60-day cruise or something like that. So
Oh, wow.
really trying to make sure that you have all of that delineated and
It's
backup
the same in
plans.
California. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's always interesting. Do you, you're in New Jersey, so do you guys, we have a what's called a POLST, a
Mhm.
physician's
Yep,
order for
we have that as
life-sustaining
well.
treatment. Yeah, you have that too. And
Mhm.
I'm assuming that you're also supporting patients with completing that as well, usually, because
That
they
would be
kind
the
of go,
physicians or the
oh,
providers are the ones doing
oh,
that.
that
So
makes
the
sense.
more the
Yeah,
medical
because they're
team.
signing
Hmm.
it. Well, I'm assuming you've been alongside many patients over the years. How long have you been doing this work?
Almost 2 decades now, which is hard to believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Sitting alongside people that are on hospice and they're in that transition, I'm assuming you've had even more conversations than I've had with people around end of life. Have you kind of pulled out like some themes that you've heard from people that are dying?
Yeah, so I'll say I deal with, different types of death in the hospital. So some of the deaths that we're dealing with are really crisis deaths, traumas, car accidents, gunshot wounds, terrible falls that result in death. And so in those instances, it looks very different because it's very sudden. And then there are other instances where, someone knows that they're going to die and they have the time to sit and look at that. And in those moments, we will do, there's an intervention called a life review, really looking back at kind of the fence posts of someone's life. What were their greatest joys? What were their biggest regrets? What is that, legacy that they're hoping to leave? What do they want to say to their loved ones before they die? I've had some experiences of helping people write letters or
Mm,
record their voice, for it's often their children, which, as a mom is just so beautiful and so hard to
yeah.
be there with. But I think that those stories have stayed with me for being so meaningful. And then, I often go to, palliative care physician, Dr. Ira Bayek wrote a book, The Four Things That Matter Most at End of Life.
Mm,
And I
mm,
I think a lot of the conversations I hear are around these four things. So he says these are the four things that the dying need to say, and also that, others need to say to those who are dying. I also think it can be anyone in any state are important
mhm,
things to say to those people in our lives since we don't know the time. We don't know if we're going to have a sudden death like that. They are, please forgive me.
mm,
I forgive you.
mm.
Thank you. And I love you. So they're so simple. And of course, there's going to be lots of variations on those. But I think they get to the really essence of what a lot of people are looking for in those moments. I'll say one thing that surprises a lot of people because I am often there, kind of keeping vigil around a patient's bed with the family, not knowing when the moment is going to be, even after there's been what we call a terminal extubation or, the removal of the ventilator in the ICU and certain
Mhm.
medications. Sometimes it's minutes, sometimes it's hours, sometimes it's days for a patient as they are dying. And something that surprises a lot of families is the minute that the family leaves and goes to the cafeteria or goes home and showers is when their loved one dies. And a
Yeah.
lot of times people have guilt around that. And I try to normalize it and say this happens frequently, and it may have even happened to some of your listeners. And,
Yeah.
I think it is like a last piece of control that we may have that we're wanting. I can imagine some of these patients are wanting their loved ones not to be in the room at that very moment, trying to spare them of something.
That was true actually for my grandmother.
Was it? That
Yeah.
was your experience?
And it totally made sense. Like once she decided to pass, she really liked she was a private person, you
Mm,
know?
mm-hmm.
And my mom's her only daughter, only child, and my mom was like there every day and really supporting her a lot, and I was there as well on weekends. But my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and really from kind of diagnosis to death, it was about an 8-year journey.
Mm,
But my mom was supporting her, and she stopped eating, and she even
mm,
stopped drinking fluids, and it continued for so long. I mean, all her hospice nurses were like, we've never seen anyone hold on this long. I think
mm.
she didn't eat for close to 3 months.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it was really kind of quite amazing how long she held on. And my mom had a trip planned to Europe. And the day that she flew out is the day that my grandmother passed.
Oh my.
Yeah. And I was able to be there, but it was like it kind of made sense. It was like that was
Mm,
kind of
mm-hmm,
her style. And I think also of needing my mom to kind of let go in that way of like
mm-hmm,
living out her life and going on a trip with her husband and just enjoying life. And my grandmother was a big traveler too. So ultimately, I
mm,
really saw it as what she wanted and how she wanted
mm.
to transition.
Oh, well, and the way that you can make meaning of that, right,
Yeah.
gives a sense of comfort, that she went on her own terms.
Yes.
Oh, well, and even the what you had to go through with the years of, we sometimes say it's death over time, right? It's a lot of little
Yes, a
losses and a
lot of
little
little
death.
losses. Yeah.
And I think something that a lot of families don't realize and then sometimes feel guilty about is that there actually can be relief
Yes.
when the person dies because you've seen all this suffering for so long and you've been experiencing what we would call anticipatory grief for a
Yes.
long time. You've been grieving your loved one, not just in the days before, but in the years before.
Yes. Yeah, that definitely was, our experience. And a lot of my clients, a lot of times when I'm working alongside people, they have diagnoses like such as dementia and Alzheimer's.
Mhm,
So, I've seen that, the arc, the years that it can go of this long goodbye and decline. But
mhm.
even, dealing with it professionally, it's different when it's family. It really is.
Mhm. Yeah, and what I tell caregivers all the time in the hospital is, our personal grief over our own loved ones will
Mhm.
come back up and sometimes surprise us when we're caring for patients that
Mm,
are clients in your case that are going through this, right? Even though it's not the same, it still can touch upon, what we've experienced. And in some ways that makes us better and more
yes.
effective and empathic caregivers, but it also makes it harder in a lot of ways too. And really, as we talked before, having to tend to yourself in those moments.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. That's definitely been and has had to be my practice,
Mhm,
tending to your own garden and your own emotional well-being. At least in my experience, I don't think we have enough of these conversations as professionals.
mhm,
So we're licensing in California for professional fiduciaries. It's a small bunch. I think there's only about 900 actively licensed fiduciaries. But, these kind of conversations I find aren't being had enough because I think the burnout is real. I think most people doing this work are burnt out. And that's probably what you're seeing in your work
mhm,
as well. It really takes
mhm,
conscious effort to be able to show up and our full selves and our big-hearted selves, and you have to tend to your garden in order to
mhm.
to
Yeah, it's
show
not
up in that way.
sustainable otherwise.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I've loved this conversation, Christine. I've definitely teared up throughout it. So listeners can't see that,
I
but
have that impact on
I
people,
have.
so.
Yeah, yeah, I've had
Mhm.
so much meaning and personal and professional from today. So I
Mm.
really thank you for being here. If there's anything you want to leave listeners with, I'll just let you share.
Yeah, so I would say to think about, some of those things that we talked about. Who is it today that you can say any of those four things to?
Mm.
The please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, I love you. How can you live out your values today as if today was going to be your last
Mm.
day? Not in a way that is morbid, but in a way that makes today even more precious. And if you have more questions about this, about spiritual practices, about chaplaincy, about grief, even self care, I write about sometimes. I do have a Substack newsletter that I put out about every other week, and I have it listed on my website. And you can go through and read some of those articles or contact me if you'd like to work with me individually.
Wonderful. Yeah, and we'll include all of that in the show notes so listeners can easily link to your website and your work. And I am subscribed to your newsletters, so I look forward to reading more of that. Well,
Oh,
thank you,
well,
Christine. I hope you
yeah.
have a beautiful day. And thank you again for sharing your wisdom with the Legacy of Love podcast.
No, thanks so much for having me and for having these really important conversations.